All right, deep divers, welcome back to the deep dive. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe and all that good stuff because we are in the final countdown. Just a couple of days left before the election, and things are getting interesting to say the least. Today, we're diving into some last-minute headlines and polls.
Yeah, these last few days before an election, they can really make or break a campaign.
Absolutely, so let's jump right in. First up, we've got the Harris campaign. They are feeling pretty confident right now. They're claiming a double-digit advantage with those late-breaking voters,
hmm
especially in those super important battleground states, the ones that could swing the entire election.
Oh, yeah, that is a really significant development. You have to think about it. In a race this tight, those last minute voters can absolutely determine who wins. It's like they hold all the power.
But on the flip side, the Trump campaign is already sounding the alarm, saying they're worried Trump might just declare victory before all the votes are even counted.
Yeah.
And they are already gearing up for legal battles.
Well, this isn't exactly a new tactic. It's been tried before, and it really raises some concerns about misinformation spreading and really just, undermining public trust in the whole election process.
Okay, so maybe let's take a break from all the serious election stuff for a second and talk about something a little lighter, or, well, maybe not. Rosie Perez had some pretty strong words for a joke that was made at one of the recent Trump rallies.
Oh, yeah, comedian Tony Hinchcliffe. He made a comment comparing Puerto Rico to a floating island of garbage, and, well, Perez, who is of Puerto Rican descent, was not happy about it.
Yeah, she said she was shocked by the level of bigotry at the rally, pointing out that this was supposed to be a political event and not a platform for hate speech.
This whole situation really brings up a lot of questions about where we are with political discourse these days. Is there still room for respectful disagreement? Can we even talk about policies without resorting to personal attacks?
Big questions for sure. All right, let's shift gears a bit and head over to Michigan, where the most recent poll from the Detroit Free Press is showing Harris with a 3-point lead over Trump.
Okay, but we have to remember that 3-point lead is within the margin of error, so it's still incredibly close. Michigan is a total toss-up.
So those polls are really keeping us all on the edge of our seats, huh?
Yeah,
And it's not just Michigan. All 7 of those crucial swing states are neck and neck. But, just because the polls are close doesn't mean the election result will be.
that's right. 538, they have this analysis showing that any of those swing states could still go to the candidate who's behind in the polls. So, yeah, anything could happen.
All right, so picture this. Trump is out there holding rallies in Michigan and Wisconsin, working hard to get those last-minute votes. Then you have Harris, who's also holding a massive rally in Wisconsin, but hers has a little twist. Cardi B and a bunch of other music stars are performing.
It's fascinating to see how different candidates try to connect with voters in these final days.
For sure. And speaking of different approaches, let's take a quick trip down memory lane to the 2020 election.
Yeah.
Remember those Trump train convoys that were popping up everywhere, even in some of those, solidly Democrat states?
They really were a powerful reminder of just how divided our country is and how strongly people feel about their politics.
Yeah, you had people who loved him, obviously, but then others who were, well, less than thrilled about getting stuck in traffic because of these convoys. It does make you wonder if we'll see similar displays of political enthusiasm or maybe frustration this time around.
I mean, with how intense this election cycle has been, I wouldn't be surprised to see some strong emotions out there.
Okay, one last thing before we wrap up this part of our deep dive. There's been a little drama over in the media world. Conservative columnist Hugh Hewitt resigned from the Washington Post. It happened after a pretty heated debate on their show, First Look.
That's right. And actually, that resignation is the latest in a string of resignations at the Washington Post. It's making people think that there might be some serious internal turmoil going on over there.
What's interesting is this resignation is coming from someone on the right, which kind of makes you wonder if the issues at the Post might actually be bigger than just disagreements over political viewpoints.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to this whole media landscape. Seems like the media world is really feeling the heat of this election, huh?
Welcome back, Deep Divers. We are in the thick of it now with part 2 of our election deep dive, and we've got even more juicy tidbits to unpack from those final days before America decides its fate. What else jumped out at you from all these articles, expert?
Well, it's really interesting to see the Harris campaign putting so much emphasis on those late-breaking voters. It's almost like they're pretty confident that they can win over those folks who are still on the fence.
But isn't that a risky move, counting on people who haven't really been paying attention to the election to suddenly make a decision and vote?
Oh, it's definitely a risk, but it's, a calculated one. We're talking about those battleground states where just a small shift in voter turnout can totally change the outcome. Every single vote matters.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's talk about, well, Trump and this whole thing about him potentially just declaring victory before all the votes are even counted. I mean, that just seems like a recipe for disaster.
Well, to put it mildly, yeah. I mean, that kind of move, it undermines the whole idea of a fair and democratic election. It could really damage people's trust in the system. It's so important for everyone to remember that it takes time to count all the votes, make sure everything is accurate.
Patience is a virtue, as they say. But speaking of things that can get a little messy, that whole Rosie Perez story really highlights how tricky it can be to navigate that line between humor and, something being offensive, especially when it comes to politics.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that words have power, and using humor to kind of target a specific group of people, it can be really hurtful.
It's a tough balance to strike. When does a joke cross the line? When does it become something that's actually harmful? It's a conversation we need to keep having.
I agree. And, we also have to think about the context of these jokes, too. A political rally, especially one as emotionally charged as this one, probably not the best place for that kind of humor.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so let's turn our attention to Michigan now. Michigan always seems to be, a key player in these elections. What stood out to you from that Detroit Free Press poll?
Well, the breakdown of support is really interesting. It looks like Harris is getting a lot of support from women and Black voters, which could be a deciding factor in whether she wins the state.
It's a good reminder that who votes and how they vote can really shape an election. Demographics matter. And speaking of crunching numbers, 538's analysis is always fascinating. Even those candidates who might seem like they're behind in the polls, they still have a chance, especially when the races are as tight as these are.
Right. It all comes down to who shows up to vote and which campaign can get their base energized and motivated to actually cast their ballots.
So, deep divers, pop quiz time. Who can name all 7 of those crucial swing states? No cheating. Okay, just kidding. We're not that tough on you.
Yeah.
But seriously, those swing states are most likely where the election is going to be won or lost.
And it's not just about who becomes president. There are also all those really important Senate and House races happening in those states, too. Those races can have a huge impact on which party controls Congress and how much power the president actually has.
So much at stake. It's enough to make your head spin. And speaking of things that spin, those Trump train convoys from back in 2020 were quite a sight.
They were very visible, very loud, yeah. A real expression of how polarized the country is and how strongly people feel about their politics.
Some people loved them, some people were annoyed by them. It's a good reminder that elections can really bring out a whole range of emotions in people, good and bad.
And sometimes those emotions can kind of spill over into real-world actions, which is something we all need to be mindful of.
For sure. Okay, so it seems like even the media world isn't immune to all the drama and upheaval of this election cycle. Hugh Hewitt resigning from the Washington Post, that's just the latest example.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is this resignation is coming from, a conservative voice, which makes you think maybe the issues at the Post are bigger than just disagreements over politics. Like there might be something deeper going on there.
It definitely makes you wonder what's happening behind the scenes at these big media organizations.
Journalism is facing a lot of challenges these days, shrinking budgets, the rise of social media, the spread of all this misinformation. It's a critical time for the industry. They really have to figure out how to adapt and survive.
I could not agree more. Well, folks, that is a wrap for part 2 of our pre-election deep dive. We covered a lot of ground, from those last-minute voters to political humor, the state of the media, all kinds of things. Any final thoughts before we head into part 3? Expert. Are you ready? Deep divers. For the grand finale, part 3 of our election deep dive. We're going out with a bang. Are you ready to wrap things up?
Absolutely. We've covered so much, but, there are always more angles to explore.
Speaking of exploring, those last-minute voters, they're really fascinating to me. They're like the wild cards in this whole thing.
They really can be the ones who decide the whole thing, especially, in those really close races that we're seeing this year. It's so interesting how their reasons for waiting until the last minute are so different.
Right. Like some people just genuinely haven't made up their minds yet, And then others, they might be playing a more strategic game waiting to see how everything unfolds.
Exactly. And, for the campaigns themselves, trying to figure out how to reach those last-minute voters in these last couple of days, it's crucial. Could be the key to winning the whole thing.
But let's talk about Trump and this whole idea of him potentially declaring victory before all the votes are in. I mean, that's a big deal.
Oh, yeah, it's a tactic that basically undermines the whole idea of a fair election. It could have really serious consequences for how much people trust our democracy.
It's like saying checkmate before the chess game is even over. Not exactly playing by the rules.
No, it creates a really dangerous situation where misinformation can spread like wildfire, and it can lead to so much confusion, potentially even, unrest.
We all need to make sure we're getting our information from sources we trust. Speaking of trust, that whole Rosie Perez story, it's a reminder that even with comedy, context is everything.
Yeah, humor can be such a powerful tool, but we got to use it responsibly, right? Jokes that target specific groups, they can have a real impact in the real world.
It's tough, finding that balance between satire and sensitivity. Sometimes it's just better to err on the side of caution, especially when you're talking about politics, which are already so emotionally charged.
For sure. It's something we need to keep talking about, how to use humor in a way that's both funny and responsible.
Back to those nail-biting numbers. Michigan's still a toss-up, Harris. Has that small lead, but it's still within the margin of error.
Classic example of why every single vote matters and, how these swing states could go either way.
And even in those other swing states where the polls might show a clear winner, 538 is telling us upsets can happen.
It's what makes elections so exciting and sometimes frustrating. They're just unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen until all the votes are counted.
And even then, there might be recounts or legal challenges. We've seen that before. It could be a really drawn-out process.
It does show how complex our system is and how sometimes it can be a little messy.
But it also shows how resilient our system is and how important it is that everyone participates.
Absolutely. Our democracy works best when everyone's voice is heard.
Okay, deep divers. Last call for predictions. Who do you think is going to win those swing states? Let us know in the comments. But before we go, let's take one last look at those Trump train convoys from 2020. What a spectacle.
They were, weren't they? I think they were a symbol of all those intense emotions that elections can bring up. Love them or hate them, they definitely got people talking.
Yeah, some people saw them as a celebration of their beliefs, while others, found them disruptive or a little intimidating.
It reminds us that freedom of expression is so important, but we also have to exercise it responsibly, with respect for other people.
And we can't ignore the stuff that's happening in the media world right now. Hugh Hewitt resigning from the Washington Post, it's just one example of the challenges a lot of media outlets are going through.
Yeah, it's a tough time for journalism for sure. Financial pressure, the rise of social media, this increasing polarization in our society.
But it's also a time for innovation, right?
Yeah.
We need a strong press to hold those in power accountable and to keep the public informed.
Absolutely. A well-informed public is essential for a healthy democracy.
Well, deep divers, this is it. The end of our whirlwind deep dive into the final days before the election. We've talked about last-minute voters, media shakeups, and everything in between.
It's been a fascinating look at this election cycle, that's for sure.
Now it's up to all of us to stay informed, keep those conversations going, and most importantly, make our voices heard.
Democracy is a team sport. We all have a part to play.
So deep divers, don't forget to get out there and vote. And while you're at it, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'll see you next time.